Jan Paul van Hecke reportedly wants to leave Brighton, and that could be pretty bad. Van Hecke is a name that means a lot more to Brighton fans than most people outside the club would even realise, and with some reports coming out lately that he reportedly may not be renewing his contract, I think it's time that we sat down and had a real conversation. Not just about him, but about football and English football in general. The way the game's changed, the way that clubs like ours are at an automatic disadvantage. And I'm not just talking about just transfer drama or speculation, I'm talking about the soul of the game and the ability for clubs to compete at the top when they deserve to do so, and how that isn't really possible at this moment in time. But before that, let's get into the player, because sometimes I feel like unless someone is wearing one of the big team shirts, their quality goes a little bit underappreciated. Jan Paul van Hecke isn't just a decent centre-back, he's intelligent, technically sound, and a fiercely committed defender who's grown into one of our most reliable performers. When we signed him from NAC Breda, he was an unknown, and in true Brighton fashion, he came in young, raw, and he had to go out on loan to get minutes and develop. Blackburn Rovers was where we first got the glimpse of what he could be, and even then, you could see that potential of being a elite level centre-back there. And then you fast forward to today, and he is easily our best defender and one of the most underrated in the league in his position. Physically, Van Hecke is dominant. He's tall, strong in the air, and aggressive in the right moments. He doesn't get bullied, and he doesn't back down from a challenge, but it's not just about the physicality. What really sets him apart is his passing ability and his football brain. His positioning is exceptional. He knows when to step up and when to drop off. He's calm under pressure, doesn't panic with the ball at his feet, and isn't afraid to play those risky line-breaking passes. You watch him play and you see the perfect definition of a modern centre-back who's comfortable building out from the back and throwing himself in front of a shot. That versatility is everything in today's game. And then there's his mentality. Van Hecke carries himself like a senior pro. He's vocal, organised, always talking, and for a relatively young player, that's rare. And in a team like ours, with players constantly developing and moving on, that kind of leadership is vital. When Van Hecke started to really make his mark at Brighton, there was a quiet hope among the fan base that maybe he could be our next Lewis Dunk. And let me be clear, that isn't just something that gets thrown around lightly. I mean, Dunk is a club icon. He's a leader, someone who has stayed loyal and become part of the identity at Brighton Hove Albion. And I don't know what it was about him, but I just had the feeling that Van Hecke would be that guy. He would stay at Brighton for years to come and carry the torch from Lewis Dunk when his career slowed down and he retired. We imagined him staying long term, maybe even getting the armband someday, becoming a symbol of this whole Brighton era, one that wasn't just about being a stepping stone for bigger clubs, but building a proper legacy and taking our club from where it's used to be at mid-table-ish, just above relegation, to being that team that can constantly compete in Europe. But in modern football, there's really not much you can do about it. I mean, these players obviously want to compete right at the very top and get paid the most money that they can be offered. Who wouldn't? And this is the part of the game that's hard to stomach. You can do everything right as a club. You can scout well, develop the players, give them the game time, build a culture, but when the call comes from one of these so-called elite clubs, it becomes incredibly hard to hold on to your players because they're all ambitious, and footballers' careers, they're only short, so you have to make the most of your prime years. And that's exactly what Van Hecke is beginning to enter. I've already made a video on this channel calling it the Big 17 because that's what it feels like now. It's increasingly hard for promoted sides to come up and stay up, but as a whole, the Premier League is full of teams trying to break into that elite circle. But let's be honest, the original Big Six still hold the keys. They've got the Champions League pedigree, the global fan bases, the sponsorship money, the prestige. It's not a level playing field. And it's not just us. Look around. Newcastle are being squeezed by FFP. Bournemouth have had to let go of their best performers last year. Brentford can't keep their best, like even their manager. And no matter how much ambition a club has and the structure that they have, it's nearly impossible to hold on to your stars if Man United come calling. The issue is deeper than any one transfer. It's the league as a whole, it's the structure of the pyramid. Football, especially in the Premier League, has evolved into this machine where money and marketability trump everything. The game is global now. TV deals, shirt sales, social media metrics, that's what drives decisions at the top. You're led to believe that if you work hard and you perform, you'll rise, but that only applies up to a point, because there is a ceiling. Obviously, it's a ceiling that can be broken through once in a while, for example, Leicester winning the league, but it didn't take long for them to fall back down too, because they can't compete with the years and years spent building a global fan base that simply makes more money than they do. And with the greatest respect to Leicester, there aren't many young children growing up around the world dreaming of playing for them. And it's obviously the same for Brighton. These players have dreams of being on the biggest stage at the biggest clubs. And there's only so much you can do before they eventually want to move on. It's the football food chain. It's not enough to build a great team anymore. You need to be able to pay ridiculous wages, offer consistent Champions League football, and have a global brand. And if you can't, well, your best players are going to get poached. Clubs like Brighton are essentially becoming elite academies for the top sides. We polish the gems and then walk them out the door. And as fans, it's a pretty brutal cycle to live through. Obviously, you can experience the temporary success that comes with it every now and then, like Leicester's league win, our Europa League run, and God forbid I have to mention it again, but Crystal Palace's recent FA Cup win. There are going to be good moments, but these moments aren't enough to sustain your weight at the top. It will take decades of incredible performance for a team like Brighton to be able to effectively fend off your Man Uniteds, Chelseas, Liverpools, and so on. But back to Van Hecke. He was one that I really would have hoped would stay, becoming our captain and have that legacy, but we can't blame him for potentially wanting more. Of course, nothing concrete has happened yet, and it's just one source so far I've seen reporting his interest in not renewing his contract and leaving at the end of it, but I actually wouldn't be surprised. Despite my lack of surprise and my lack of blame, I would have to question the board if they didn't fight until the very end with everything that they have to keep him, because he's integral to our team. I discussed João Pedro leaving before and how I didn't think he would be that missed due to the replacements we have in line, but I think we would miss Van Hecke massively. And that's not a rogue comment at all, it's barely elite ball knowledge to point that out. I obviously have faith in Tony Bloom as he's got us this far and has rarely got much wrong in the process of doing so, but I think this would be our first major issue in a long while. There's a deeper conversation we need to have about sustainability, about fairness, about whether we really want a league where the same 5 or 6 clubs dominate and the rest just feed into the machine. But there really isn't much any of us could ever do about it. We've seen that money drives this sport in the way that they looked for the Super League. We know that these clubs pay more in wages and get away with more because they generate the biggest incomes. So as a Brighton fan, as a Newcastle fan, Aston Villa, Bournemouth, Brentford, whoever, we just have to accept our place in this food chain. I'm sure we have the measures in place, and Bloom and Barber have their replacement for Van Hecke lined up already. However, I just really don't want that guy to leave, and I think it sums up all the problems we have if he does. Not on a personal level, as I'm sure he just wants to go and win trophies and make his career as successful as possible, and he's very capable of doing so. But on the level of how we simply cannot compete with matching the pedigree or wages anyone else that comes in for him can. And there's nothing we can or will be able to do about it except sit back and let it happen. If Van Hecke does leave, I'll be gutted. But I'll also be grateful for what he gave us, for all of the moments, the leadership. I'll always wonder what could have been if football was that little bit fairer and we were able to keep the players regardless of money. I guess it kind of is fair because the ones who make the most money get to have the players and reap the rewards of that pedigree, but to me it just seems like they get to keep their bubble and nobody else is allowed in. Even Man United this season is the perfect example. They've been able to spend hundreds of millions after finishing 15th. Nobody else can compete with that. If you're a Brighton fan, you'll know the pain. If you're from any other club outside the top 6, you probably feel it too. Van Hecke leaving us is a massive blow, but like I said, what can you do about it? Well, I'll tell you one thing you can do about it, and that's like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and leave a comment below if you agree or disagree with anything I have said here. And with that, fade to black.